The wind howled across the dry plains like a lost soul, and rain drummed hard on the tin roof of Miriam Dawson's small Texas farmhouse. Wrapped in her thick coat, she held a lantern in one hand and pushed through the storm to check on the animals. It was her nightly routine, one that brought a small sense of purpose since her husband died the year before. Please like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this. The land felt lonelier now, heavier. Every creaking door and groaning wind echoed louder than before. As she reached the barn, something made her stop. A cough, raspy, weak, and then a knock, so faint it nearly got lost in the storm. Miriam's chest tightened. She raised the lantern higher, squinting through the sheets of rain. There, slumped against the barn door, was a man. Mud covered his clothes. His sleeves were soaked in blood, one eye nearly swollen shut. No hat. His boots were torn, barely holding together. Miriam's breath caught. She gripped the lantern tighter, her heart pounding. She lived alone. A stranger in the middle of a storm was never a simple thing. But as she stepped closer, the man looked up. His eyes, tired, desperate, full of pain, met hers. He didn't speak, didn't beg, but in his silence Miriam heard it all. "Get up if you can," she said, voice steady but cautious. He tried. His legs gave out. She opened the barn door anyway and helped him inside. The barn was warm with the breath of animals. Horses shifted, cows stirred. Miriam led him to a quiet corner and laid down dry hay. "Sit," she said. He collapsed onto it. She brought clean water and a cloth. "I'm not a nurse, but I know enough." He winced as she cleaned his wounds, but didn't protest. "Don't suppose you're going to tell me what happened?" she asked. He stayed silent. Miriam sighed. "All right then." Her hands moved, gently but firm. The storm outside cracked with thunder, but inside there was only the soft rustle of hay and the quiet mercy of a woman doing what she could. That night the storm raged on. Rain battered the roof, and wind tried to pry open every corner. Miriam sat nearby with a blanket draped over her lap, eyes watching the stranger. He was asleep now, or unconscious, it was hard to tell. His chest rose slowly, lips slightly parted. She hadn't asked his name, didn't need it. What mattered was that he was hurt and alone. Something about him reminded her of the broken horses she used to care for. Wild, scarred, but still breathing. "What happened to you?" she whispered, mostly to herself. The stranger stirred, but said nothing. Miriam stayed there until sleep finally took her, lantern still burning low beside her chair. Morning came gentle, like an apology. The sun spilled through the slats in the barn roof, casting golden strips across the floor. Miriam stretched, her back aching from sleeping upright. The animals stirred around her. Chickens clucked, and a cow lowed in the distance. She stood, brushing hay from her coat. The stranger was sitting up now, wrapped in the blanket she'd left him. His face looked rough in the light, bruised, cut, but his eyes were clearer. She walked over with a tin mug of coffee and a plate of bread. "Hungry?" she asked. He took the coffee with a quiet nod. "Name's Jonah," he said after a long pause. "Miriam," she replied. No more words passed, but something small and unspoken settled between them. Jonah sat quietly, both hands wrapped around the warm mug, his eyes focused on the rising steam. Miriam didn't ask anything more. She just sat beside him, her own mug in hand, sipping in silence. The barn felt peaceful, the storm nothing but a memory now. "You got a safe place to go?" she finally asked. Jonah shook his head, slowly. No, that was all he said. No story, no excuses. Miriam nodded. "Well, you can stay here until you get your strength back. I won't turn you out." He looked at her, startled by the kindness. "You don't know me," he said. "No," she replied, "but I know what it feels like to be left out in the cold." Later that day, Jonah helped her feed the animals. He moved stiffly, wincing with every step, but he didn't complain. Miriam noticed how careful he was with the horses, how he whispered to the skittish ones and took his time. "You've done this before," she said, handing him a bale of hay. "My uncle had a ranch," he said quietly. "Long time ago." Miriam didn't push. She handed him another task. The work helped pass the time, helped keep the questions from crowding in. As they worked side by side, Miriam realized how long it had been since anyone had been here besides her. The silence wasn't as heavy with someone else around. That evening, after a dinner of leftover stew and cornbread, they sat outside on the porch. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, and the air held the scent of wet earth and hay. "You're lucky I found you," Miriam said. Jonah gave a soft chuckle, the first sound of humor she'd heard from him. "I didn't plan on being found," he said. "I was just walking. Didn't know where I was headed." Miriam looked at him sideways. "Well, you made it to my barn. Must count for something." Jonah looked out at the fading light. "Maybe it does." Miriam leaned back, rocking gently in her old chair. "My husband built this porch," she said. "Used to sit here every evening, swearing he'd fix that crooked fence, and never did." Jonah smiled. "Looks like it's still holding up." "Barely," Miriam replied with a snort. "Like the rest of this place. But I'm still here, so I guess that counts for something too." There was a long pause before Jonah spoke. "You remind me of someone," he said. "My sister. She was tough like you, always trying to fix things the world broke." Miriam didn't ask what happened to her. She just reached over and gave his shoulder a small squeeze. "Well, you're welcome to fix fences while you're here." Days passed slowly but full. Jonah stayed in the barn, but came in for meals. He never said much, but he worked hard. Fixed the gate, cleaned the troughs, patched the sagging roof. Miriam found herself looking forward to his company, even if most of it was quiet. One afternoon, as she watched him mend a broken beam near the barn, she called out, "You always this handy, or are you just trying to impress me?" Jonah looked up, squinting in the sunlight. "Maybe both." She laughed, a sound she hadn't made in a while. It felt good. The land felt different too. Not healed, not yet, but lighter, like it remembered what it felt like to be cared for. One night, the wind picked up again. Not a storm, just a restless breeze that rattled the shutters and stirred old memories. Miriam lit a lantern and brought it to the barn. Jonah was sitting on a hay bale, looking through a small, worn photo he kept tucked in his coat pocket. Miriam hesitated at the door. "You all right?" she asked. Jonah glanced up, nodded, and held up the picture. "That's her," he said. "My sister, Elise." Miriam stepped closer, studying the faded image of a teenage girl with wild curls and a bright smile. "She looks kind," she said softly. "She was," Jonah replied. "Lost her in a house fire when I was 16. I tried to go back in, but his voice trailed off." Miriam didn't speak. She just sat beside him, letting the silence carry the weight of what he couldn't say. He talked more that night than he ever had. About Elise. About sleeping in alleys and under bridges. About years spent drifting from town to town, never staying long, always running from grief. "People look at you like you're broken," he said. "Like you'll never be anything else." Miriam stared at the lantern flame. "I know that look," she whispered. "Got it a lot after my husband passed. Like people were waiting for me to fall apart. Some even hoped I would." Jonah turned to her. "But you didn't." Miriam shook her head. "Didn't have time. The animals needed feeding. The roof needed patching. Life doesn't wait." For a moment, there was just breath and light and shared pain sitting quietly in the barn. The next morning, Jonah stood at the edge of the field, watching the sky blush pink with sunrise. Miriam joined him with 2 mugs of coffee. He took one gratefully. "This place," he said after a while, "it's tired, but it's still breathing." Miriam smiled. "Like me?" "Exactly like you." He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, thick and stained, tied with a faded red string. "I want you to have this." Miriam blinked. "What is it?" Deed to land, he said quietly. 2,000 acres west of here. It's mine. Been holding on to it for years, waiting for someone who deserved it. She stared at him, heart hammering. But Jonah, you don't even know me. He looked at her with steady eyes. I know enough. Miriam took the envelope with trembling hands. This isn't just a gift, she whispered. It's a legacy. Jonah nodded. It's not just about what you did for me. It's who you are. You opened your door without asking. Gave me dignity without needing my story. My sister would have done the same. Miriam wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her shirt. I don't know what to say. Jonah looked out over the land. Then don't. Just promise me you'll use it. Make something beautiful out of it, like you've done here. The breeze carried the scent of grass and old wood as the sun stretched higher. Miriam reached out and squeezed his hand. I will. Later that day, she stood alone in the barn, staring at the envelope. Around her, chickens pecked the dirt, a horse snorted, and the world felt very big and very different. She pressed the envelope to her chest. Her voice cracked as she whispered, Thank you. Somewhere behind her, Jonah's voice began to narrate in memory, low and full of emotion. People walked past me when I was broken. She didn't. The screen of memory split in two, Miriam in the present, and a younger Jonah barefoot in front of a burning house, screaming his sister's name. Then flashes him older, sleeping on benches, eyes hollow, brushing past people who never saw him. I was just another ghost to them, his voice continued. But she saw me, not as a risk, not as a problem, just as someone who needed a place to rest. The images blurred together, Jonah washing dishes for coins, being pushed out of warm stores, sitting in the rain with nothing but a threadbare coat. Then back to the barn, to Miriam, to now. She didn't ask why I was bleeding or who I used to be. She just opened the door. Miriam sat on the edge of the hay bale, tears streaming down her face, not from pity, but from something deeper, the humbling realization that a single act of mercy could ripple out like that, could save someone's soul. The weeks that followed were like spring breaking through frost. Miriam's land, once quiet and tired, now stirred with purpose. She reached out to the local orphanage, just like she and her husband used to talk about, invited the children to visit the farm for a weekend. They came wide-eyed and full of joy, running through the fields, feeding chickens, helping plant wildflower seeds. Jonah built picnic tables, fixed the barn roof, and smiled more than she'd ever seen him smile. He still didn't talk much about himself, but he didn't have to. Miriam saw it in his eyes. He was healing. One little boy tugged on Miriam's coat. Miss Miriam, can I feed the lambs? She knelt beside him, guiding his hands gently. Of course, sweetheart. Let's do it together. Her laughter echoed, free and full. Nearby, Jonah watched, sleeves rolled up, leaning against the fence with quiet amazement. He glanced at the children, then back at Miriam, and shook his head like he still couldn't believe any of it was real. The land, once dry and cracked, now bloomed with color. Laughter replaced the silence. Life had found its way back. There were no news cameras, no interviews. No one handed out awards. It was just a woman who chose kindness on a stormy night, and a man who walked out of the shadows because of it. Miriam didn't need recognition. Neither did Jonah. The barn stood solid and strong, the house a little brighter, the land alive. On some evenings, Jonah would sit on the porch and watch Miriam work with the kids, smiling to himself. When she joined him, he'd hand her coffee, and they'd just sit, shoulder to shoulder, saying nothing but sharing everything. One afternoon, as they walked the border of the new land, Miriam asked, "Do you ever regret it? Giving this up?" Jonah looked around at the wildflowers, the children chasing goats, and the barn shining under fresh paint. "No," he said, "because it's not gone. It's just finally home." Miriam nodded. "Feels that way." She leaned into him slightly and he didn't pull away. They kept walking, the sun warm on their backs, the fields endless and full of promise. Behind them, the wind carried laughter, the kind that only comes from healing. Jonah wasn't just a stranger anymore. He had become part of the land, part of the laughter, part of the rhythm that now filled Miriam's once quiet world. The children adored him. Miriam trusted him. And when people in town asked about the new hands helping at her place, she'd simply say he's a friend, one of the good ones. And that was enough. The house had grown warmer. The barn stood straighter. The silence had turned into music, soft, lived-in music that played in chickens' clucks, kids' giggles, and the creak of rocking chairs at sunset. That farm would never be in magazines or history books, but what happened there mattered. Not because of money or fame, but because two broken people decided to believe in goodness again. Jonah had once said that compassion wasn't loud. Miriam finally understood what he meant. It was a quiet act. A door opened in the rain. A stranger welcomed. A blanket offered. And from that moment, a whole new life began. The land didn't just grow crops now. It grew hope. And in every seed planted, every fence fixed, every smile shared, that night of mercy lived on. Like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this, and let us know where you are watching from under the comment section.